Hello, my name is Professor Solis. Welcome to Government 2306, Week 1. Okay. So, we're going to look at Texas political culture. So, Texas political culture is a traditionalistic, individualistic culture. So, what does that mean? Right? It means that it's dominated by political elites, right? Guided by tradition, right? We see it from the founding, right? Mexican tradition, Spanish tradition, and when Texas becomes a state, we see the Anglo tradition, which is going to blend with Southern culture, Southern hospitality, and the idea of small government, limited government. We have government should stay away from the people and more of a pro business um right? The government is we need small government to protect the rights of the people, right? There are three long-lasting patterns in Texas government: one party state, right? We see that with the dominance of the Democratic Party uh in the throughout much of the 1800s, right after Reconstruction, the Democratic Party controlled the state. That goes all the way up to the 70s, 80s when you start seeing more Republicans getting into office. Provincialism, this idea that like Texas uh matters, right? This idea that the small, right, with small limited government should not get involved with the federal government. Like we need to take care of our own. And then you have pro-business, right? The idea that in order for us to generate wealth, we have to focus on this pro-business mentality, right? Take care of the workers, big companies, big corporations, give them tax breaks, and those tax breaks are supposed to trickle down into the people, right? In the forms of higher wages, right? And all pro business also means big corporations, right? Business, they pay little or no taxes at all. Okay. Well, Texas economy. So what's the Texas economy? So Texas economy started off with cattle, cotton, right? But right now the big industry is oil, right? Discovered Spindletop right next to Beaumont. It's going to help farms and factories operate more efficiently. The oil is going to be used to lubricate machines, right? Power factories, and then the oil was used as an alternative to keep the factories open longer, making them more efficient. They can produce more, right? Instead of using candles, right? But this is going to bring a boom and bust mentality, right? When oil is discovered in West Texas, small little towns are going to be transformed overnight. You have a huge uh, rush of people getting into these towns. These towns are going to generate a lot of money, economy is gonna grow. But once the oil is gone, dried up, right, or the price of oil drops, these small towns are gonna go into a bust, right, ruining the local economy. One way to try to prevent that, the Texas legislature is going to create the Texas Railroad Commission. It's a democratically elected position, right, and it regulates the railroads, regulates the shipping rates. 1917, it's going to be granted the power to regulate oil and gas industry to try to stop the boom and bust mentality. The oil industry, it's a great source of revenue for the state. The Permanent University Fund, that is a so the Texas government, this is the state owns a huge land out in West Texas, and there's so much oil on that land that land is valued I believe in the billions, and that money is goes to the University of Texas and Texas A&M, and that's one way they get funded. In the 90s, the Texas economy starts to diversify. You get the tech boom. Texas Instruments, right, becomes big. Those are the calculators that you're probably accustomed to. The Austin San Marcos area, I-35, home to Dell Computers, other companies such as Oracle are going to start moving into the state. And one of the reasons why we see this is because Texas, again, this pro-business mentality, right? Not a lot of regulations. It's a right to work state. You don't have to worry about with unions. Pro-business, right? They pay low taxes, and as opposed to other states, right? That's one of the big reasons why Tesla moved from California to Texas, right? And the other big driver of the Texas economy is the international commerce. Texas shares a border with Mexico. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is going to benefit the US and Mexico. And we see that benefit here in Texas, right? We get a lot of Mexican products, right, from across the border that, that consumers take advantage of. The main one, avocados, uh, beer, alcohol. During the first Trump administration, NAFTA was amended and it's now called the United States Mexico Canada Agreement, USMCA. And the only thing that really changed was when it came to um, the idea of patents and other products. But because of this free trade agreement, Mexico is currently America's number one overall trading partner. Right? And those benefits are greatly seen here in Texas. Okay. We go. So who are Texans? Right. Now let's look at the population of Texans. White people, again, 19th and 20th century, largest ethnic group was Anglos, white people. Again, these are considered non-Hispanic whites. They define the Texas political culture. The idea, they're the ones that introduced the idea of Republican form of government, right? Democratically elected, uh, uh, popular sovereignty, religious freedom, freedom of the press. White population is going to peak in 1950 at 74%. Uh, an estimate, excuse me, from the census from 2023, currently, right, 11.8 million Anglos, right? That's about 38% of the Texas population. We look at the second group, Latinos. Most are Mexican descent, right? Um, we One of the main drivers of Mexican migration into Texas is the instability that Mexico faced in the late 19th and 20th century, right? Many Mexicans were pushed away because of the economic situation, political instability in Mexico, and they sought refuge in Texas. What attracted them to Texas, what's pulling them to Texas is the proximity, of course, but also the labor market, right? With the introduction, the discovery of oil, right? These factories are gonna need workers, and right, you're gonna see Mexicans working in these factories, right? Also, even out in the farms, these farms are gonna become in a sense, little small businesses, and you're gonna see Mexicans working there. So Mexican American population, excuse me, steadily increased in the 20th century. As of 2023, there's 12 million Latinos in Texas, about 40% of the state's total population. Okay, black people, again, most black people entered Texas as enslaved people by white people from southern states in the 19th century. After independence from Mexico, slave population is going to increase on the eve of the Civil War, right? About one third of slaves was the entire population. June 19, 1865, Union troops are going to land in Galveston. All slaves are free, right? This is a big thing here in Texas. June 19th, it became a federal holiday under the Biden administration. just to commemorate the idea that, the idea that slaves are free, slavery is gone. During Reconstruction, African Americans are going to exercise their political rights, right? They're going to be protected. And we see that, right? 10 black delegates are going to help write the Texas Constitution in 1869. 43 are going to serve in the state legislature between 1868 and 1900. Again, this is when, again, you did see some protection from the federal government to help African Americans participate in democracy. But after Reconstruction, you start seeing the federal government pull away, less help from the federal government when it comes to African American civil rights. So you're going to see a lot of African Americans lose their political rights, the rise of Jim Crow, segregation, lynchings throughout the South. Um, and then the introduction of the white primary, right, that forbids African Americans from participating in democracy, right? After World War II, we see that African Americans are going to gain major political victories through the civil rights movement, right? We see that with the uh, uh, with MLK, Rosa Parks, the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education. Prior to that, you have Sweat versus Painter, right? Which you have an African American law student who enrolls in at UT, and UT forbids, says no, you cannot uh you cannot be enrolled in our school because this is an all white law school. The Supreme Court says that Herman Sweat can enroll at UT. He becomes the first African American enrolled at UT. Um, and you see that, right? In the 60s, you have under the Johnson administration, you have the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act that again helps African Americans participate in democracy, right? As of 2024, 3.6 to over 4 million African Americans lived in Texas, and that's about 13% of the state total population. Asian Americans, this is the one of the fastest growing populations here in Texas. And we see this, we see most Vietnamese coming into Texas after the Vietnam War, right? In the mid 70s, the political instability, America pulling out of Vietnam. So a lot of Vietnamese settled here in Texas around the Houston area, right? Fort Bend. Fort Bend has a large concentration of Asian Americans from Vietnam. You also have Indian Americans. Um, as of 2024, 1.7 to over 2 million Asian Americans live in Texas, and that's about 6% of the total state's population. Okay. So now we're going to look at the Texas Constitution. There's 5 ideas that unite the U.S. and Texas Constitution experiences, right? Political power is derived from the people, right? Um, the will of the people, right? The Constitution says we the people. So we are giving power to these elected representatives to represent us. Okay. And the separation of powers, right? You guys should be familiar with this, the legislative, executive, judicial, and then you have checks and balances, right? To ensure that one branch of government does not become the dominant branch, right? Power is divided and they all check each other, right? Individual rights, right? In the federal constitution, the Bill of Rights, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, um, right? The right to a speedy trial. So that forbids the government from violating a number of political rights that people have. The Texas Constitution goes a little bit beyond that. It guarantees certain victim rights and the right to have efficient system of public free schools, something that we don't see that in the federal constitution. And then the idea of federalism, right? That power is divided between the national government and the state government, right? You see that in the 10th Amendment, right? So there's 3 differences that distinguish the constitutional experience of Texas from that of the U.S. So the federal government, right, has the supremacy clause of the Constitution, Article 6. In matters of disagreement, U.S. constitutions takes precedent over the state constitution, right? So in other words, the federal constitution, right, is the supreme law of the land, right? The second one, necessary and proper clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Um, it gives the Constitution gives the legislative branch, right, enormous power, right? And this is how the federal government has used that clause to expand uh, government activities. We don't see that in the Texas government, right? The framers of the Texas government constitution denied office holders broad grants of discretionary powers, right? And then the Texas power to establish local governments, right? Local governments within Texas derive their authority directly from the state constitution and the people of Texas as a whole, not from the people in the locality, right? So, in other words, the power of Harris County comes from Austin, right? The power does not come from us who are living here in Harris County. Okay. We go to the next slide. So Texas constitutional development. So we're going to look at the different constitutions here in the state of Texas that we've had. So the first one, this was when Texas was part of the state of Coahuila, right? It was Coahuila y Tejas. That was part of Mexico. No freedom of religion. Catholicism was the state religion. Slavery was restricted, and it's a unicameral legislature. So just one branch, excuse me, not one branch, but just one. You didn't have two houses, just one house, right? 12 elected representatives. There was two from Tejas. The governor and the vice governor elected every 4 years. Tejanos, right, felt that they were neglected in the state constitution, right? One of the big upsetting points for the Tejanos was that they were not given trial by jury, public schools were not funded, and no bilingual laws. The laws were in Spanish. Right? But the framers of the Constitution did promise the Tejanos that they would get their own state, right? A part of this is still within Mexico, when the population increased, right? So now we get to the next constitution, and this is when Texas becomes independent from Mexico after the Texas Revolution, right? 1836. It is based on the U.S. Constitution. You have two houses of right Congress with representatives from each county, and you have the Senate from different districts in the state. You have a president and vice president elected for 3-year terms. The president was not allowed to lead armies without congressional approval. So that's one check on the president's power, right? Declaration of Rights mirrored the Bill of Rights. Congress provided for a general education system. Avoidance of military service resulted in a loss of citizenship and property. And then slavery was legal, right? Slaves could only be imported from the US, from the southern states. And then free blacks could live in Texas, but they needed congressional approval for residency. Okay. And then now we get to the next constitution when Texas joins the Union, right? New state constitution was 2 times longer than the previous constitutions. Again, we have a bicameral legislature, two houses, right, with elected 2-year representatives and 4-year senators. Revenue bills originate in the House. Legislature appointed the comptroller, the treasurer, and land commissioner. Governor was elected for 2 years, appointed the attorney general, secretary of state, and the judges, convened and adjourned the state legislature, granted pardons and reprieves, commander-in-chief of the militia. And then you have the section, the Articles of General Provision. This is the longest article, consisted mainly of limits of the legislature, what the legislature could not do. And there was a clause in there that protected Hispanic heritage from homesteads and recognition of community property. And that mostly dealt with people that lived in the valley that had Mexican ancestry. Okay. Okay. Uh, The next constitution, this is when Texas secedes from the United States and joins the Confederacy in 1861. It's a modification of the previous constitution in order for Texas membership in the Confederacy. One of the stipulations was they pledge loyalty to the Confederacy. Grants Texas citizenship in the Confederacy, loyalty to the Confederacy, and the extension of slavery, right? And then again, once the Civil War is over, this is the Constitution of Texas being readmitted into the Union. Texas met the minimum requirements to be readmitted to the Union. The powers of the governor are expanded. But the thing is, Lincoln is assassinated and Congress refuses to approve this new state constitution. This is when you get to radical Reconstruction. The Republican Party upset with Andrew Johnson, so they take Reconstruction out of his hands, right? And they appoint Edmund Jane Davis to become the military governor of Texas and Louisiana. So now they get a new constitution. It's called Reconstruction Constitution, 1869. Um, During the Constitutional Convention, discussion of the division of Texas into three states, and they start charting railroads, right? They wrote the Constitution in the last 10 days before the deadline, right? They procrastinated. They were worrying about other things, such as, giving railroad companies pieces of land. They're going to centralize government around the governor, right? There's going to be large growth in government expenditures, increased taxation, accumulation of heavy and state debt to fund education and to fund industry to try to get the Texas economy going again. A very powerful governor, right? It controlled the state militia, state police system, local government, and newspapers, right? And then, so from this experience, you get the next constitution, and this is when Republican Reconstruction ends, right? When you start to see the federal government pull out from the state. So you get 1872, the Democrats gain control of the state legislature. In 74, 2 years later, they gain control of the governorship. And then in 75, they called a constitutional convention to write a new constitution, one that goes away from the ideas of Reconstruction. So 90 delegates are elected to write a new constitution, right? Here's the breakdown of that: 76 Democrats, 14 Republicans. 14 of those Republicans are six African Americans. 72 were immigrants from southern states, 19 from Tennessee. About 50 had come to Texas between 1840 and 1870. 33 were lawyers, 28 farmers, 3 merchants, 3 doctors, physicians, 2 editors, 2 teachers, 2 mechanics, 1 minister, and 1 postmaster. Many had held high ranks in the Confederate Army. 3 had been Union Army officers. So you can see the breakdown of this. You can see, again, shows you how Texas is moving away from the Reconstruction era, right? They were determined to include as many safeguards as possible in order to prevent previous abuses. Again, they're trying to limit the power of the governor, right? One branch of government cannot dominate, right? We don't want the governor office, the executive branch to have so much power. Extensive list of practical answers to potential problems. The goal is to restrain individuals and government in positions from wrongdoing. We don't want people to abuse their power. The final document, very lengthy, detailed, repetitive, but provided a daily adequate government at the time, right? It's constantly changed over time through the amendment process, embraces the separation of powers. Governor has very little power, right? Executive powers were given to several executive officers, almost all of them elected. Okay. So we're moving away from the idea that the governor appoints these people. Instead of that, the people get to vote on who they want, who they want these people to be in power, these office holders. The legislature was reigned through salary reduction the legislative sessions are every 2 years. So our legislature does not meet every year, they meet every 2 years. and they only have specific mandates of power. So again, that's one way the framers weakened the power of the legislative. Okay, so civil liberties in the Texas Constitution. Okay, civil liberties concern the protection of individuals from unrestricted power of government. Right, some civil liberties. Right, in the American federal system. Right, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to petition the government, to assemble, to bear arms, of the press, excuse me, right? And the American federal system, states and localities must grant the residents at least as many rights as those guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, right? The states and local governments may grant their residents more rights, right? And afforded in the U.S. Constitution. So, for much of the 20th century, individuals and groups seeking protection from state laws often turn to federal courts, the National Bill of Rights, right? Um, right, we see that with right when someone is discriminated, right? They sue to the Supreme Court. Brown versus Board of Education. They used the 14th Amendment, right? But over time, the U.S. Supreme Court has began interpreting, excuse me, individual rights in the U.S. Constitution more narrowly. So now we're starting to see state constitutions becoming more important in protecting individual rights. So state courts began playing a larger role in defending civil liberties. Okay. Article 1 of the state of our state constitution, like the National Bill of Rights, provided for equality under the law, religious freedom, due process, and freedom of speech, right? And they go beyond the federal Bill of Rights, right? Which the Texas gives protection to the mentally incompetent. Okay. So let's look at now this some state constitutions in comparison to the federal constitution, right? So what are some common features? The separation of powers, right? Power is fragmented, right? The Bill of Rights, right? In some states, often more extensive than the federal Bill of Rights. Um, Now if we look, if we compare the federal constitution to the state constitutions, right? Our federal constitution is very brief, right? About 4,300 words, flexible language that adapts with the times, few amendments, right? There's only 27 amendments in our federal constitution. The amendments are very fundamental, very important amendments, right? Um, and then you have discretion for elected officials to govern, right? And if we look at the Texas Constitution, right, 97,000 words, 545 amendments, longer than most other states, right? So Texas has a huge constitution. With a state constitution such as ours, the hand of the state legislature is tied, right? The state legislature has not been able to act upon questions of importance to the state because of the constitutional restrictions, right? So that's resulted in more amendments, right? So if the state legislature wants a power that they do not possess, they have to introduce an amendment, and that amendment has to be approved by the voters, right? So how do you amend the Texas Constitution? We only have a referendum, right? It has to be proposed by 2/3 of the Texas House of Representatives, and then 2/3 of the Senate of the Texas Senate. The ratification, majority of voters in a referendum election, right? So, what are the problems with our amendment process? Lower voter turnout, obscure amendments. Some people don't understand what the amendments are, what power we're granting to the state legislature. Complex language. Many amendments protect special interests, and citizens usually don't care. Okay. Now let's look at the federal system. The powers of the federal system, right? War. Only the federal government can um, go to war with other countries, right? Texas cannot declare war on Mexico or Canada. Only the federal government can. Interstate commerce, right? The federal government can regulate interstate commerce. The federal government establishes a currency system, right? Greenbacks are dollar bills, right? Texas does not have its own currency, right? Foreign affairs, right? The federal government can conduct foreign affairs with other countries, right? What are some state powers? Education, right? Texas uh has power over the education system here in Texas, right? Commerce within the state, right? Texas can regulate commerce between different cities, different counties, police powers, right? And elections, right? That's something that a lot of Americans do not know, do not understand, but all of our elections are controlled by the state. The federal government does not control our election system. It is the state. Um, what are some shared powers? Taxes, right? The federal government, right, can impose a tax system, right? The state government can also impose taxes, right? And to make laws, right? The federal government can make laws, the state government can also make laws. Okay. The expansion of federal power over the states, right? We see that with the necessary and proper clause, interstate commerce clause, equal protection clause, the 14th Amendment, and grants to the states, right? Categorical, specific, and block general, right? So one of them would be uh, 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 it doesn't pertain to Texas because we have not expanded Medicare under the Affordable Care Act. Um, but the Obama administration, the Affordable Care Act, the more people that are enrolled, the government would provide some of that funding. Texas has not, Texas and other states have not opted into that program, right? We have the evolution, returning powers to the states. So one of these, the big one, the most common one would be when it comes to marijuana laws. So that's why states like Colorado, right? They're able to sell right marijuana, right, because the federal government has allowed it, even though it's technically illegal under federal law. um Under state law in Colorado, right, the state has that power to regulate it, right, and get a tax out of it. Here in Texas, Texas has not opted into that. uh but we saw that another example would be during COVID, right? Different states impose different restrictions, right? The mask mandates and stuff like that. Other states were very strict on those. Other states were not. And the big one, it's abortion, right? Roe versus Wade was protected. And now with the Dobbs decision, now that power has gone back to the states. So the states have the power to regulate abortion when women can seek that procedure, right? It's up to the individual states. Prior to that, right, it was the federal guidelines under Roe v. Wade, and the other case in the 90s, Planned Parenthood versus, I believe, Casey, right? But the Supreme Court overturned those cases and the Dobbs decision a couple of years ago and gave that power back to the states. So now the states, different states can regulate that, and that's why you see some people, some women here in Texas going to different states where they can get that procedure uh, and without being criminalized for doing that. Okay. All right. So now relations between the state, full faith and credit clause. So what does that mean? It requires each state to enforce civil judgments of other states and accept their public record. A big example of this would be marriage licenses. So if you get married here in Texas, right, your marriage is valid in every other state, right? Also with driver's license, right? Your driver's license, right? You can use it is valid in other states. It recently in the news, I know Florida was trying to get the Supreme Court to hear the case, that they were not happy with other states giving licenses to driver's licenses to undocumented people. So they wanted to sue the state because they felt that in Florida, since undocumented people in Florida are not eligible to get licenses, um it was not right for people from California to come to Florida with those licenses. So and I believe the Supreme Court said they were not going to hear that case. um but that just gives you an example of the full faith and credit clause. Interstate privileges and immunities clause. States may not deny the citizens of the other states the full protection of the laws, the right to engage in peaceful occupations or access to court. So you have the same rights here in Texas, in California, right? In New York, Florida, Louisiana, right? Extradition. So if a criminal flees to another state, the original state can request that person to be returned. States are generally expected to cooperate, but there have been cases where state refuses to return criminals. One of the big reasons is they don't want to pay the cost, right? The state does not want to pay the cost to send that criminal to the state, to the other state that where he is wanted. Settling disputes between the states. Again, states cannot use force against another state. They have to resolve it by taking legal arguments to the Supreme Court, just like Florida was Florida and California when it with the issue with licenses to undocumented people. They have to take it to the Supreme Court. Like Florida cannot declare war on California and say, "Yeah, we're going to war because you're giving undocumented people a license," where they don't have that right here in Florida, right? They can create interstate compacts. Here you see a map there of how Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, um, and Nevada and Utah, right, have created these pacts when it comes to the water of these rivers, right? They got to make sure that there's enough water down the river to help their communities. Okay. And those, by the way, the interstate compacts are have to be approved by Congress, by federal Congress. Okay. So, the readings for this week, guys. So chapter 1 in your textbook, the political, culture, people, and economy of Texas. That's pages 5 to 7 and pages 14 to 25. That was mostly of that was highlighted at the beginning of this lecture. Chapter 2, the Texas Constitution, page 39 through 41, and pages 51 and 61. It's going to go a little bit more in depth and about how the Texas Constitution changed over time. Um, and there's a really good diagram that shows the differences. Pay attention to that. It's very important. Reading one, the first reading, the states and the federal system. Um, so this just shows you how federal power has grown over time. It gives you the major eras, right? Very important. Make sure you take a note of that. The role of major historical turning points and how the federal government limits state power today. Uh, so it gives you some cases. Pay attention to that. Very important. And then the second reading is I know the link. It's the whole book. You do not have to read the whole book. Just read the first chapter, chapter 1. Um, the divided states of America, why federalism does not work. Just read chapter 1. Do not read the whole book. I mean, you can if you want. It's a really interesting book, but just read the first chapter. So focus around federalism was created to balance national power and state power. It gives you some examples, talks about the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, it talks about Madison, how federalism helped solve political problems, but it also protected inequality, and how federalism can divide the country as much as it unites it. So make sure it gives you some examples. Make sure you take note of those. And that all of that is going to help you for the first online discussion board prompt. So, uh, again, just please begin by introducing yourself to the class and sharing the major you are pursuing. Or if you don't, if you are you currently undecided, just tell us what are you thinking about majoring in. It doesn't have to be long; it could be short. And then I want you to consider the following question after listening to the lecture, doing the readings. Do the states have too much power today or too little power? So, after learning about the political culture, people, and economy of Texas, the history of the state constitution, the division of powers within our federal system, and the evolution of that system over the past 230 years, do you believe we have achieved an appropriate balance of power between the state and the federal governments? Right. In your response, be sure to explain your reasoning clearly and support your ideas with examples from the course material. Your initial post is due by the end of Thursday and must be a minimum of 350 words. And then don't forget, you are also required to submit at least 2 replies to your classmates by the end of the day, Sunday. So each reply must be a minimum of 250 words. Okay. Um, so again, what do you guys think? Do you think does Texas have too much power? Too little power? Again, use the lecture for today, the readings, the examples, and the readings to make a case, right? And don't forget to reply to your classmates by the end of Sunday. And then here's the rubric. Um, go ahead and look at this rubric. Again, these discussion board are 5 points. Again, make sure you participate. Make sure you provide some evidence from the readings. And make sure you respond to at least 2 classmates. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, comments, any concerns, feel free to email me. And that's it. I'll see you guys in the next lecture for week 2.